Welcome to Capes, Cowls and Masks, the show where we uncover the world of soups and science fiction. And welcome to our weekly review show of the latest entry into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, WandaVision. Today we'll be looking at the third episode of the show called Now in Colour, directed by series director Matt Shakman and written by Megan McDonnell and creator of the show, Jack Schaefer. I'm your host, David Osger. I am a podcaster and writer on the website Fresh Take Hub, and I also do film journalism and all sorts of fun stuff, including this show. And I'm not joined by Jake this week as we do our weekly reviews. I'm once again joined by our special guest for these WandaVision reviews. He is...
Yeah, hi, I'm Tom Gabber, co-host here of the WandaVision analysis and the show's resident. I'm going to say comic book shaman this time. I feel like we decided Guru was taken, so I'm just going to go by shaman this time. And forewarning to listeners of this show, I am on a massive rum hangover, so just be prepared for me occasionally maybe losing my train of thought.
That reality warping stuff is getting to Tom's head. He's having to take some rum after the show.
I should say this is the only thing that makes sense now.
You're drinking the rum and the walls are peeling away, and you're like, oh god, what's happening?
Everything's turning into blocks, and I'm like, oh no, what's happened now? What has happened?
Maybe a title can be, Japanese, like, related, in terms of like a guru or samurai. Like you said, you're going to commit seppuku, I think.
Ooh,
on
comic. Yeah, I did. Comic book samurai. I like that.
Yeah. So, Tom, how have you been feeling after the premiere of the last two episodes, which they have also now titled since we last spoke? How are you feeling about everyone's reaction? Obviously, there's been more theories and more trivia revealed as the week has gone on as well, which is some stuff that we missed out. So how are you feeling about the show after a week?
I'm feeling pretty good about it. I've enjoyed seeing people's reactions to it all over Facebook and in several of the Marvel groups I'm in. They seem to be responding really well to it. I also saw a lot of people who were just like, I don't get it, I don't understand what's happening, which I'm a bit shocked at, because I feel like the trailers and hype for the show was very clear on what we were getting. So it was very clear on that. But no, generally, obviously we've seen it's like Marvel's highest rated property on IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes now. It just goes to show like how good a show it is, and I think this week's episode also helps ramp that up. But yeah, no, it has been great seeing the reactions to it and just seeing all the various theories come out. I have seen some rubbish theories, though. I've seen some pretty good theories. It'll be interesting to see now after this week, because I feel like some people's theories, including our own, have been bolstered by this one. So I'll be interested to see the discussion that happens in the lead up to the next episode, which I think is probably going to have a few pivotal moments in there. But we're not on episode 4 yet, so we'll just continue on with episode 3 for now.
Yeah, we'll go through a bit of that at the end of the episode. And yeah, I think that will be quite interesting to sort of see where this is going, especially in the context of, changing the eras and style each week, but then still fitting in this ongoing story, which this episode definitely does. And yeah, I think it's like you said, it's interesting seeing more theories come out, and some things which I've seen people say, and I'm like, well, that's a nice theory, but again, to me, some things have already been disproven, or I can't. It's nice to think, when they're like, oh, maybe this was happening. I'm like, yeah, that's a nice idea, but then I can't really see them doing that based off how loyal they seem to be following certain comic runs and stories, and also just the fact that there are things in those first two episodes that already kind of proves what people are saying. But they're still kind of those like fun theories you have where you're like, oh yeah, that's a cool theory to think of. Kind of Game of Thrones, I suppose, had a similar thing where you're like, oh yeah, that would be a fun, alternate alternate way to do it, but it's, ultimately probably not going to be the way it goes.
Oh, don't talk to me about season 8 Game of
Thrones.
Oh no,
Yeah.
let's not bring that up.
No, and that was an example of theories coming out which probably would have been better than the definitely would have been better than the outcome. But
tell me about it.
But I think that, yeah, and it's interesting actually you said about IMDb is the first episode has now been titled Filmed Before a Live Studio Audience. And that has
Makes
a
sense.
7.5 on IMDb. Then Touch That Dial, which is the second episode, is a 8.0. And then this newest one, now in colour, is an 8.6. So it is definitely going up and up as it goes along.
I think something's wrong here, Wanda. Yes, I know what you mean. The truth is, we are in uncharted waters. And you know what? I'm anxious too.
We just don't know what to expect.
No?
We'll go on to now just our overall thoughts about this specific episode, which is now in colour. So this takes place in the sort of 70s setting, and we get our traditional sort of like homage opening at the beginning, which is a very 70s, WandaVision, with all the little...
It was very Brady Bunch.
Yeah, exactly.
Brady
Like,
Bunch.
is they like hexagons? Were they, or like like they're in the
I
little
think they
shapes?
were hexagons or something like that.
Yeah, and lots of family antics, flipping burgers and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I already loved that aesthetic from the beginning. What's your overall thoughts, Tom? What did you think?
Yeah, I loved it. I thought it had like the exact right blend of humor and surrealism, and we definitely got to see the plot march forward a little bit. We got a bit more clues as to what the situation is. Obviously we got to see Geraldine kind of reveal herself a bit more as just like this outside agent who's come in trying to find Wanda, I guess, or help Wanda. We're not completely sure, but I think it was great, the whole episode, because the parts that were funny were again hilarious. Like, I loved it when Wanda and Geraldine having that conversation, and Wanda's trying to like shoo away that stalk that just keeps like
Yeah.
Like, that whole scene was hilarious. And also the classic sitcom trope of woman going into labor, the man freaking out, and the woman who's in labor having to help him breathe through it. I don't know. It's quite an overused trope in sitcoms when you think about it, but it's always funny, and I think it was very funny in this instance as well because of the way Elizabeth Olsen played it, with that sort of look on her face of like, Vision, really? Are you the one who should be being comforted right now? Come on.
Yeah, I think Paul Bettany's performance, again, like you said, that's quite a classic trope, but it's pulled off because of their performances and just, I suppose, the way the characters are in the original films and everything anyway as well. So because it is such a far cry from what Vision would usually be like, or those two characters. So yeah, that definitely helps in that situation.
I also think the episode helped sort of elevate certain moments in the previous two episodes as well, just because, like, for example, there's two things in particular. So one, obviously we joked about in the last podcast, and it's still one of my favorite moments in the first episode where Vision's at his office and he just goes, what does this company actually do?
Yeah.
And just the guy keeps giving him like really vague answers, and he's like, no, but what do we actually like make? And he's just like, computational forms to measure our productivity. Yes, but production of what?
Yeah.
And initially you kind of think like, that's just a bit of fun poking at, the classic sitcom tropes of people being in like really vague jobs where you're not actually sure what they're doing, but they sound kind of important. But then watching this episode, you realize it's more actually in the context of Vision realizes that things are not quite right.
That's true, yeah.
And like, I think going back to that, because like, obviously, like, if we go by the theory that maybe Vision is a creation of Wanda in this reality, she's obviously tried to make him as Vision-like as possible. So therefore, he would be smart enough to notice these things and go, that doesn't quite add up.
Yeah.
This doesn't sound right. The other one as well, because we talked about in the last podcast how Catherine Hahn like carries herself well in the show. Like, the way Agnes acts is just like always perfect for each era. And when I was like rewatching the episodes before episode 3 came out, I kind of started thinking like, because obviously we know like Agnes is probably like a big part of what's happening, but I could really see that like more than just she's playing this part, she is actually like really playing this part. Like she's just like going overboard and just loving it and just steering into whatever madness Wanda's creating. So then this episode, when you see her like talking to Herb and whispering and like trying to play off Vision, just be like, oh no, don't, nothing to worry about, just it was like really sort of showing like, again, like, oh hang on, so Agnes really has kind of just been enabling Wanda's fucking fantasy so far.
Exactly, yeah. The fact that she has that like something about macrame in and like rings the bell and winks. But I liked in that moment that they didn't actually put like the laugh track or anything. So as if she's like, I'm gonna like go back to sitcom mode now and like, I'm gonna do this like one-liner and I'll try and make things go back to normal by doing that. So, and like you said, she does that a lot in the first 2 episodes. She waltzes in and she's kind of playing the big theatrical role because she's kind of trying to play along with the entire situation or trying to absorb Wanda into it more. Again, I suppose we'll see more as it comes along which way she's doing it, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, and it was just nice to see Catherine Hahn show her. Obviously she didn't get much, but like she showed a little bit of range, because in that scene with her where she's like trying to get him to stop talking, or she's like clearly acting quite nervous that Vision is figuring things out, it was nice to see Catherine Hahn not just have to play the standard just like comedy role. Like she's always like very flamboyant in whatever comedy role she's in, so it was nice to see a bit of a more subtle performance. And that's not to like have a go at Catherine Hahn, I think she is amazing, but it was just nice to see her like not have to stick to just comedy. And I think as the season goes on, I think we might get to see a bit more of that from her, and I think we might all be pleasantly surprised with her performance by the end of it.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, one of my friends, I pointed out, and people often forget as well, that she voiced Dr. Octavius in Into the Spider-Verse, so she's used to playing that sort of sinister villain in a comic book property.
I didn't know that.
No, yeah, it's it came up on YouTube the other day, the behind the scenes, and I was like, oh, this has clearly come up because they're like, oh, Catherine Hahn's in WandaVision, let's like promote this again. So yeah, she's the female Octavius in Spider-Verse.
Because I loved the female Octavius in Spider-Verse. I thought she was great.
Exactly, and it makes sense because you're like, oh yeah, of course it's Catherine Hahn, because she's such a great performance in that film. And my friend even said, my friend Stefano said, this won't happen, but imagine if it turned out that Agnes was Octavius. I was like, that would be crazy. And he was like, it could happen, there is a Spider-Verse film coming out, but who knows.
That's true. I also had the realization the other day, and I felt quite stupid that I didn't bring this up in the last episode, but we're talking about Agnes is very likely Agatha Harkness. And then, like, as I was thinking that the other day, I was like, wait, if you contract Agatha Harkness, you literally do get Agnes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I thought that was kind of a given from what we were talking about. I'm surprised.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. Like, I couldn't believe that I didn't bring it up, but I realized it the other day, and at first I was like, wow, I've had this profound realization, but then I was like, no, that seems actually obvious. Tom, what are you doing? You're meant to be the comic book samurai, and you didn't make that connection. But I think there were a few, we were talking about it in our little Facebook chat, there were a couple of things we maybe missed over the last 2 episodes. But
yeah, definitely.
We're not perfect, folks. We're not perfect.
No. Well, like I said, it's one of those things, isn't it? Because people are digging through these things. That some people's job is just literally to dig through frame by frame to make these lists and theories. And it's kind of weird as well because you're used to it when, again, Endgame and Captain Marvel, and you get all these videos come up on YouTube and stuff like, who is she? What is this? What this means for the future? And we haven't had that for a long time. Or if we have, they've just been really trying to regurgitate the stuff that we've already had for an entire year, or maybe 2 years in some ways, because we haven't had any MCU stuff. So now that they've got this, they're like, oh, thank God, we can like really talk about theories and stuff again. And yeah, she comes up a lot. There's a lot of pictures with the circle around the brooch and that kind of stuff. And one we missed out, I think I pointed out to you guys, was the symbol for Monica Rambeau, which was on the vanishing box. So I can't believe we missed that one. But
yeah, it's such an obvious one. Like, it's literally emblazoned on the front of the box. And then she appears within it, and none of us went, oh yeah.
But I like you as well, enjoyed her in this episode. Like you said, getting to play that different sort of persona. But also I'm glad that Geraldine, we'll say for the context so far, but we know she's Monica Rambeau, but so far the show hasn't actually told us that. I like that they they give the sort of Agnes role to Geraldine as well. That's sort of like, hey, I'm popping over and I'm trying to borrow something and all that kind of stuff. It varied it up. I'm glad that the show isn't turning into like too much cliche and too formulaic. It's so like, if Vision was in work again, then I would have been like, oh, right, you know. And I like that in this one as well, that 70 shows, like you said, like the Brady Bunch and like different strokes and all that kind of stuff, usually are quite contained within the house or the home. So I like that this episode was very contained in the house, because that is quite a trope of those 70s and 80s sitcoms. Whereas, you know, the 50s and 60s are a bit more like, oh, let's go to the diner and let's go to the place of work. Whereas as they became more family orientated, then they became more like focused in the household. And I like that, again, Geraldine got to play that role and mixed it up a bit. We didn't get the sort of like same thing with Agnes popping in. So that mixed it up a bit for me. And
I just also like Geraldine as a whole in the episode.
Yeah, she's great. And I think she really got to shine in this one a bit more. I think that obviously the 70s aesthetic really, you know, helps Teyonah Parris. I think she looks fantastic in those like costumes and like the hair and everything. I think that all felt really fantastic.
The hair was very reminiscent of Monica Rambeau's like hairstyle, especially in like her sort of first appearances in the like 70s and 80s. I think nowadays she's got like a slightly different look, but I think it was obviously just other than being like an obvious reference to hairstyles in the 70s, clearly just like, yeah, this is the Monica Rambeau you were hoping for. So he's like a quick, kind of like in a Luke Cage season 1, where you have that flashback where like he very, very briefly looks like his original comic book self with the afro and the headband and the really large like yellow shirt.
Yeah, and I think and for me, with, you know, there was like this series continues to be like really excellent in terms of visuals, and I think that on the Disney Plus or Marvel YouTube channel, they released a little featurette, as they do, like little 2-1 minute sort of videos about the costumes, and it was a great week for them to release that video, because this is an episode which I think that the costumes really shined, and they were fantastic in the last 2 episodes, but obviously the black and white kind of took away from being able to appreciate them on a higher level. And they talk in that featurette about how they were choosing certain colours and certain looks to look better in black and white as they would have done in the day. And yeah, it did make me really appreciate, you know, the like how much detail they go to in the sets and the costumes, because you could see that a lot here, and it becomes a part of the story. You know, Monica's got that sword, you know, necklace, and then there's like a lot of things with like giraffes. There's like the soft toy giraffe, and then they've got like giraffe ornaments in their living room, and the house as a whole was again fantastic. It looked very 70s, and I liked they started the episode with the kind of stereotypical shot of the house and the little funky music over the top, and you know that got me into it straight away. I didn't find this episode as funny as maybe the last 2, but I think again that's because there was that more of a blend of darker elements, of questioning things. Like you said, Vision had that great moment, and it was such a Vision moment, you know, like something's wrong here, Wanda. That, to me, it's almost like Paul Bettany is playing like a dual role. He is playing sitcom Vision and actual Vision, and in that moment you saw actual Vision, and then he reverts to sitcom Vision, which I think is interesting. I'm interested how that's going to develop as it goes along. And yeah, obviously we had a lot of more then darker moments, and more moments that point towards what's going to happen. So at the end of this episode, and I think that's why this is higher rated, is a lot of people really enjoyed that, you know, the way that this episode turned out, and the way that it turned a lot darker, and you had a lot of references to the MCU, as we'll talk about later, which were fantastic as well, because we talked about that last week, saying about like Wanda's accent and those kind of, you know, and her origins, and that very much comes through here as well. So yeah, I really enjoyed this episode. I think it continues to be really consistent, and yeah, I can't wait to see how it continues to develop. I'm glad it's not turned formulaic or cliche. You know, we're getting straight into it. She's pregnant in this episode. That's causing like a bit of mayhem and frenzy, where the house is getting altered and changed, and lights are going off, and the sprinklers are coming on. So a bit of madness is starting to happen. And then, you know, the babies are born by the end of the episode. So again, I'm glad that they didn't drag that out as if like that where they're still on episode 5, like, oh, who is Geraldine? You know, I'm glad that they're going at a quick pace with this as well.
I think even though obviously it was always going to be a bit of a slow burn, the fact is they do only have 9 episodes this season in which to tell the story. So I think things are just going to continue to pick up, not necessarily a breakneck pace. I think they are still going to obviously like keep a lot of the mysteries until the last episode to unravel. But yeah, like I said earlier, I think the next episode is going to be a pivotal one. I think it's probably going to have a lot of big moments. There are a lot of moments in this episode that I absolutely loved. Like, one of my personal favorites when Vision takes that doctor back to his car and it's like, oh, you know, you can go back to Bermuda now, and the guy's like, oh, don't think I should bother now. And Vision's like, oh, well, why not? And he's like, has that moment where he looks kind of scared and he's like, oh, you know, small towns, they're just impossible to escape from. And then he just walks off and Vision's kind of stood there just like, what is happening here? Like, what is going on? I really did like that moment because, again, it was like whoever that doctor was, just like, it seemed like a very brief break from him playing that sitcom doctor to him just genuinely being like, how am I going to get out of here, out of this mad situation?
Oh, everything's happening so quickly. We'd like to keep the news just in the family for right now.
Of course. Mum's the word. I'm off. Bermuda, baby.
Yes. Hey, Hub! Think you might have taken the hedge trimming a little too far there, old chum.
So I have. Thanks, buddy.
Yeah. Don't mention it.
Yeah, well, I think now is probably a good like moment to bring up any other favorite moments, as we are talking about like big moments that stood out to us. So was there any other favorite moments, you know, aside from speculation or things that you think are connected to wider comics or the MCU? Is there anything specifically which you found funny or great or enjoyed?
I particularly enjoyed the whole thing of Wanda trying to hide her pregnancy in the way many classic TV shows used to, of just constantly strategically putting things in front of the actress's bump to hide the fact that they're pregnant. I mean, to be honest, it still happens now. Just like if a character's pregnant in real life, they'll just like, right, you're constantly going to be sitting down this season so that you can't see that you're pregnant.
You're going to suddenly start wearing big coats for some reason, you know, in the middle of summer.
And just, I did enjoy like Vision's just gradual more freaking out of just being like, oh, that was the one bit I like, was when she starts going into labor and Vision is just like, oh, but the doctor's going on holiday to Bermuda, and she's just like, what, at a time like this? And he goes, well, to be fair, honey, the baby is approximately 9 months early.
Yeah, that was great.
I loved all the moments where it kind of got a bit more surreal and just pointing towards more plot. I do agree with you that it perhaps wasn't quite as funny as the last 2 episodes, but again, they were trying to lean more into the plot and surrealness this time round. So
yeah,
it's not really a criticism to say it wasn't as funny, because, like, as we said, this show isn't trying to purely be a comedy show.
No.
It's trying to be a bit more than that. So I don't know. I mean, I guess you could call it a criticism that the jokes maybe weren't as funny as the first 2 episodes, but as I said, it didn't seem like that's what was important to them this time round. So
yeah, and again, I think that kind of genre as well lends itself to that. I think the more difficult thing with this era is, like, especially for us, obviously, you know, we didn't, you know, grow up during that era, but you kind of tend to see the 50s and 60s as more, we kind of are shown it a lot more because of the nostalgia and the, like, oh, look how funny things were back then, and it, you know, like Bewitched and stuff, they've become really famous properties, and, you know, they've become a part of pop culture. Whereas I think the 70s and stuff is maybe, like you said, Brady Bunch, you know, is quite American, whereas probably if you look at, like, the British kind of 70s stuff, it's very different. So, you know, we probably aren't as attuned to that. And I suppose the comedy wasn't kind of as, like, slapstick and, like, here's a big joke. It was kind of like, oh, look, here's this charming family situation. Like, so, like, moments like when Vision is helping the doctor, escorting him outside the house, and Wanda just sort of looks at her her belly with a smile, and they have that like, oh, you know, that I suppose was more typical of that time, is that people just enjoyed the coziness of it at that time. It wasn't kind of like, oh yeah, and let's watch Vision slip over a banana peel kind of thing. It was more like, oh, let's see the characters get pregnant and have babies, and then one of the kids, you know, drops, you know, falls in a mud puddle. It was more that kind of homely, small scale stuff, which again links to what I said earlier about like being contained within the house. And I kind of liked that as well. I thought that fit what they did for this episode again, because they had it as a more self-contained story.
And as you said, because obviously like they were leaning into that more just like coziness of it, and just like a happy like family life, and just it does seem like Wanda creating this scenario of just like, this is what will keep Vision from trying to think too much about this world we're in and trying to like get out of it. If I like make this like reality cozy and happy enough, then he's not going to want to leave, and we can just live like this forever.
Yeah,
because I think that was very clear in this episode. Any time Vision had like sort of any inkling of what was happening, or any time he was maybe just like sort of poking holes or questioning things like how her pregnancy was moving on so quickly, she was just kind of just like reacting to that almost instantly, like changing the reality around her instantly, just to like make it so the Vision would stop like thinking too much and just be like, oh, just be happy here, just be happy in this moment, forget everything else.
Yeah, because the rewind moment in this is kind of like they built to it, isn't it? They literally showed like a rewind effect on the first time they showed that, whereas this episode was more like it just literally cut. And it was like, so they had like built up to that as if they were like, oh, we can get away with this now because, you know, we've shown that rewinding is a thing. So here it was almost as if you didn't know if it was a mistake. You're like, oh, what's happened? Has my Disney Plus like skipped ahead or something? But you're like, no, it's, you know, it's actually like a purposefully done thing. So that again showed like a more level of control from Wanda, where she can just go, no, I don't like this, instantly click it, like change it. So it's not even like a rewind.
Yeah, I really liked that moment.
And as far as, like you said, there wasn't as many comedic moments, but one moment I did love, which I thought was a great joke, was when the lights went out and then it went to next door, and the guy with the mustache, and she's like, honey, do my earrings look fat? And then the lights go out and he's like, oh, thank God. The way he delivered that line was so good, just because like he didn't even look at her. He's like, oh, thank God. I really love that.
I love that moment as well.
That guy is becoming one of my favorite characters. He's so funny, especially in the intro. I just like his look, you know, when like Vision's walking down the steps and he's like, hey, and he's like, you know, high-fiving his friends, and that guy's just like, he just looks so different from like the previous episodes. And again, that's credit to the costume team, that it's the same actor, same guy with a mustache, but he looks completely fit in within the 70s, whereas before you were like, oh yeah, he completely fits the 50s 60s aesthetic, but now he somehow looks perfect for the 70s. I'm like, so they've done a really good job as well with hair and makeup to make him look appropriate for each generation, which is great.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, we have to give real props to the costume and set designers for all of their work so far. It has been incredible.
Two of my other favorite scenes, I'd say, you know, apart from like I said the end, is I liked the setting up the nursery scene. I thought that was great because I think early in the episode I still felt that Elizabeth Olsen and Wanda were still coming across as a bit 50s housewife in that moment of doing the like, oh, well, thank you, doctor. And I was like, oh, I don't know if she's actually changing it up here. But once we got more into the kind of situational stuff, it did then appear that she was more playing the kind of 70s mum and that kind of stuff. And she was being quite different then, which I appreciated. So that's what I liked about that nursery scene is when she was, I don't know what she was eating. She was eating something from a bowl, and I found it really intriguing. I was like, what the hell is that? But she does this kind of like scrunched up face, which was really cute when like she says something and she goes like, oh, and she like sort of like crunches up her nose, and she looked like kind of like really like charming and funny in that moment. I liked how, you know, with the butterflies and stuff, and she's like, oh, did I do that and stuff like that, or I didn't mean to. And it's just moments like that which I thought really worked for the moment. And again, it kind of set up that situation of Vision trying to understand how the pregnancy was going along. So saying like, oh, well, by this reckoning, then you should be giving birth in 3 days' time or whatever. So that was all good. And I also liked the drying scene. Again, the hair and makeup did a really great job here. The set was all like wet and damp and everything. She brings in the wind, and they have that great shot of her, like, opening herself to like the breeze, and then and
then Vision in the background, just like
and then her hair's all perfect and stuff in the next moment. So that again was played really well. I really enjoyed that.
What do you mean she has no home?
She came here because... She came here because we're all...
She came here because we're all what? What are you trying to tell me?
What is that? What? That symbol. Who are you?
I was really kind of intrigued by Herb and the way he's being played in this. I don't think Herb is human because of some, like, obviously there was that moment at the start where Vision like points out, say Herb, you've kind of missed the hedge there, and he's cutting into the wall, and Herb just kind of like laughs it off and then just continues doing it. And like the way when like he was like almost about to tell Vision something, but like the way he kept fragmenting his sentences, I was kind of watching it going like, people don't talk like that, even if they're like unsure of whether they should tell people something. Like, they don't phrase their sentences like that. And that's just the vibe I was getting from the performance from the actor, is that Herb is either not completely real or he's just not completely human. Because I think there will be some, like, Agnes I think is very much human, but I think she's, if it is Agatha Harkness, she's clearly a very super powerful witch. Geraldine / Monica, obviously real, as we know. But I think a lot of the other townsfolk, I think it's probably a mixture. Some are probably real ones that Wanda is like brought in to like play along with this deranged fantasy of hers, and then I think some of them are probably just other. And I think, just like I said, just who I'm not sure who the actor who played Herb is, but just like that's what I was getting from his performance, and I was enjoying it actually. Just especially the scene where he's cutting into the wall and he's just like staring at Vision, just like kind of weirdly. And I really enjoyed that. Obviously, again, we got to give props to Catherine Hahn and Elizabeth Olsen and Paul Bettany. They were all delightful. Elizabeth Olsen especially was a delight this episode.
I think the giving birth scene especially showed that. I think the moment where she'd given birth and then Vision was like like going up to her and she had that like like she did that face like that was great.
Just like, what?
And but yeah, that scene as a whole was really charming. I loved as well how they, when she said, "Don't you want your son to see your true self?" I thought that was really nice again, because we talked about that before, where we were saying about it's nice that they've never made it a big thing of like, oh, she's a witch and he's an android. They've never sort of like shied away from that. They have in some respect that, like, say, Infinity War, for example, the first time we really see them kiss is when he's in his human form, or whatever you want to call it. But then gradually, now that the series has come along, we see them kiss when he's like in his full Vision get-up. So I appreciated that moment for saying that, they didn't want to shy away from that they wanted to be like, yeah, this is just a mask that he puts on. We want Vision to be the android, and so his true self is that Vision. And I liked that idea that, of course, Wanda would say that, because she would be all against kind of like hiding yourself and being your true self. So I thought that was a nice moment, and I thought the performances did particularly well there for just the charm, especially when Paul Bettany had that Tommy line when he said, oh, little Tommy, and she's like, Tommy, and he's like, yes, and like they had the awe. But I was like, that was really, if they didn't have the audience like, oh, I would have been like, oh, because that was so charming. The way he delivered that was so sincere. I thought it was fantastic.
Exactly. I really enjoyed that moment as well. And yeah, just I think everyone brought their A game to this episode, really.
Yeah, Teyonah Parris, she did, like, it seemed like she was able to finally have that big, elaborate when she was doing the story, like, and then he fired me, and like, oh no, and then she was like, but then he hired me, and all of that was great. But obviously then turned to the more serious stuff. So yeah, they really did, like you said, bring their A game, I think, with this episode. Yeah. So did you want to go into your speculation? Obviously the end of this episode did amp things up. So, previously we've had seeing somebody was monitoring the TV series on those televisions. Then we got to see like the beekeeper and everything. And now we've got to see that,
the real world.
We see Geraldine is sort of forced out of this dome or, altered reality. And I loved the way that it turned to widescreen. I thought that was great. It had that like sound effect.
Yeah, it was a nice touch, that, I thought.
Yeah, and then
I really enjoyed that.
And she sort of like flies out to there. She's covered in like Wanda's magic, and then you immediately, and I loved this as well. This was one of my favorite moments. I liked how they had Daydream Believer in the trailers, and it was a really creepy, awesome mix of it. And I was like, oh, I hope that's in the show. So while it was just the normal version of the song, I'm glad that they brought that in, because while I had my complaints about the credits and the length of them before, I thought that eased us into the credits a bit better as well, rather than just immediately having like...
It felt a bit more natural than the previous ones.
And it just fitted the moment as well. Like I said, Daydream Believer obviously makes sense for the situation we're talking about. But yeah, it perfectly juxtaposed against all the helicopters and the tanks and big armored vans which are coming along. So I think my biggest... the other big thing from that, as we'll get on to, is that, Wanda was talking about Pietro and being a twin. And, there's obviously the fact that she has 2 children and babies. So we'll get on to that. But to talk about the Geraldine and Monica stuff, do you think that then we are going to lead into a kind of flipping back and forth now between the kind of sword stuff and the Wanda stuff? Or do you think we'll not now see her until... this wraps up like episode, what would it be, 8 to 9? Do you think we're going to kind of get her there, like saying, well, this is my experience there, this is what I was trying to do, she's been interviewed by Jimmy Woo or something? Or do you think we're still going to have the sitcom set up until we then get to the finale? What do you think that leading to?
I think they're probably going to set it up so that like each episode, it will just be mostly focusing on the whole like sitcom aspect and Wanda. And then I think, like, sort of at the end of each episode, like maybe the end of next episode, you might, as you said, just it'll end on just us seeing Jimmy interviewing Monica. And then, like, I imagine if they do that, it'll only be, like, a short scene. It's not going to be too much. But I feel like they'll do that at the end of each episode, like, kind of build up the sword arc until the finale when we see them actually, like, spring into action and try and stop whatever's happening. But yeah, I'd honestly just like I wouldn't mind if they did set it up like we flip between the 2 storylines, because I'd love to know how Sword gets set up in the MCU. I'm sure there's been references to Sword in like previous Marvel properties like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Agent Carter. I'm sure. Or maybe they reference Spear. I don't know. There's so many different organizations in Marvel. It's hard to keep track of them. I think,
is it, which I can't remember. Oh, yeah, I think it's Far From Home, isn't it? The end credit scene where Nick Fury's on that ship. Is there like a sword symbol on the ship or something like that? So.
I think like the implication was that it was meant to be sword. I can't remember though if there was like a specific like logo or anything hanging about, because like I think I was just too focused on the fact that Nick Fury's on a space station with a bunch of Skrulls. I was kind of just like
Sam Jackson in space is enough to be like, oh my god.
It's like, now this is the franchise, right? Just give me like 5 movies of Nick Fury in space, and he doesn't even have to do much. One of the films can literally just be him sipping a martini like, in front of the exploding nebula or something. But but yeah, so it will be interesting to see like how Sword is set up, how they're going to tie into the story,
and how Monica is a part of this as well. I think.
I mean, my theory on that is simply because like as we saw her like burst out of wherever she was, there was like a very clear kind of like energy barrier type thing. Given Monica's powers, which I'm not quite sure what to call her powers like technically, but like part of it is that she can't like in her modern day incarnation in the comics currently, she's actually like a hard light form. and she can essentially just like harness like the energy of light, and she can like essentially travel at light speed if she wants to. So it kind of makes sense that they turn to her to get into this reality, because if there's anyone who can like breach a sort of energy wall to enter a new reality, it's someone who has the potential to travel at the speed of light. Though obviously I kind of want to know how Monica got her powers, because the last time we saw her she was a little girl in Captain Marvel.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it, like, the MCU to me doesn't seem that, I don't know, so far they don't seem to like this, or like, oh, we're just going to introduce this person who has powers all of a sudden. I wouldn't be surprised if she is just an agent of S.W.O.R.D. because of the links to Captain Marvel and her mum and stuff, and she just gets her powers later on. I wouldn't be surprised if she hasn't got powers yet. I think she might just be an agent of S.W.O.R.D. at the moment, and we'll later see, you know, might be this series, maybe something happens that then gives her powers or something.
True. It could be that case.
Because the MCU does kind of like to sort of not have too much like, oh, this person has powers and we have this big backstory. They kind of try to tell you the story in the moment rather than sort of having like backstory as much.
True. I mean, they could also end up explaining how she gets her powers in Captain Marvel 2, because I'm sure she's meant to appear in that.
Yeah.
As her older self.
Yeah.
So...
that's true.
Yeah, or it could be a case of, as you say, she gains her powers here, and then that's how it ties into Captain Marvel 2, because she just comes up to Carol and is like, Carol, remember me? Look, I can do this now, and shoots a building to oblivion.
Yeah. Well, I suppose the other thing linked to that then would be the twins and the babies. So obviously we mentioned last week about speculating about Tommy and Billy, and lo and behold, you know, that's what they named the children. So obviously, you know, what do you think of that?
Love that. I just love like the potential that has, because obviously I'd love to see Wiccan in the MCU. A little less keen on Speed. I mean, I like Speed. That sounds weird, me just saying here. I like Speed. Speed is great. But I liked him well enough, but like I think many comic fans would agree that he didn't quite have the same like sticking power as Wiccan did.
No.
I think just because like Speed's whole thing obviously is just that he's like Quicksilver. He's just fast, whereas Wiccan actually has a bit more of an interesting power set where he's a reality warper, and it's just like he's kind of like weirdly a reverse Zatanna. So Zatanna just like says his spells by just saying what she wants to happen in reverse. Billy just says what he wants to happen in normal speed. Just repeats it as something like, if they're falling off a building, he can just be like, I don't want to hit the ground, don't want to hit the ground, don't want to hit the ground, and then he'll like float up just before hitting it. And also the fact that he has that relationship with Hulkling, who is like a half Kree, half Skrull dude. They're just wonderful together. I love reading them in the comics, so I'd love to see that happen in the MCU in the future, if they can bring Wiccan and Billy into it a bit more, and then bring in Hulkling.
Yeah, because I've seen some speculation as well about people saying whether this entire situation, if it is controlled by somebody else like Mephisto or someone like that, whether they're doing it because they want the children, because they know that there's some sort of, because again we talked about before, wasn't it, that Wanda makes a deal with, is it just the devil, or is it like...
Well, Mephisto is like pretty much just the Marvel Universe devil.
Yeah.
He goes by Mephisto, but he's essentially like Satan. Like he looks the part. His hell is very much like the Judeo-Christian imagination of hell. So he is basically the devil.
And Jake mentioned about when, you know, so it's like a part of Mephisto's soul to produce those children. So yeah, I was wondering whether it might be in the interest of somebody who might be in control of this situation, or, you know, aware of it, that they want to produce maybe two heroes or like supernatural beings that they can use. So maybe that they want to kind of like maybe an X-Men kind of thing with the Horsemen, yeah, kind of like a Horseman situation. Kind of they want to have these like two supernatural beings that they can have as horsemen to the earth or something like that, and that's how maybe they could age them up. They, you know, this character can just age them up and be like, yeah, you know, now they're the age I want them to be to go and do this evil stuff or whatever. And
could be, and also Wiccan has precedent for kind of not so much turning evil, but like at one point he was possessed by, I think, like this ancient magical being from like a dead iteration of the multiverse, and he went by the name Demiurge for a bit, and he was like a bit of a bad guy for about 4 or 5 issues maybe.
Yeah.
But there is a precedent of Wiccan basically being like used for evil means.
Yeah.
So it could end up being a situation like that.
And I think Speed could work as well, because if they don't bring back Quicksilver in some way, if he does show up in this series and it's just as a kind of like cameo, then I think the people would be more on board, because they'd be like, oh well, if we haven't got Quicksilver, they can replicate that with Speed, so he can just become Quicksilver. Obviously, if they were both
There's an interesting
existing.
thing about that though, because I saw this week that apparently the voice actor who used to do the like Spanish dub for Evan Peters' Quicksilver in the X-Men films has apparently announced that he's doing work on WandaVision as well. Like, he'll be performing the Spanish voice for a character on there.
Well,
so,
Evan Peters is meant to be in this show, isn't it? Because I remember seeing
allegedly.
Yeah,
allegedly.
Exactly. Yeah.
I always take things like that with a pinch of salt, because like whenever I see these articles, like they'll have the headline saying Evan Peters to appear in WandaVision, but then like you go into the article
and it doesn't,
and it's just whoever's the columnist just going, here's how it could happen.
Yeah, there's
nothing
a rumor
actual
going around. They've
but,
not actually. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So like, whilst I do think it makes a certain amount of sense, because as well, if they want to bring the X-Men into the Marvel universe, I think a best way of doing it is just cherry picking their favorite actors from the Fox films.
Yeah.
I mean, Evan Peters' Quicksilver was hugely popular, so
Yeah.
I mean, what you'd be a fool not to bring him back, really, if you're bringing the X-Men back. And then, as we previously said, they can then look to just recasting the rest.
Yeah. Well, I did really like Aaron Taylor Johnson. Like, I've always been a fan of him as an actor as well, and so
yeah, I like this Quicksilver.
So, and those two appeared in Kick-Ass as well, which is funny. So, but maybe again, we're dealing with multiverses. They could have 2 different Quicksilvers or something if they want to go down that route. But it might if Evan Peters is in this, he might be playing a completely different character, or maybe he's Speed. Who knows? Maybe they're like, hey, wouldn't that be fun? But I would like to see Aaron Taylor Johnson back, and that's what people loved as well in this week, is that I've seen a lot of people happy that we finally got Quicksilver acknowledged, because obviously we've gone through Civil War, Infinity War, 2 wars, and then Endgame with no mention of Quicksilver or Pietro. So it was really nice.
Hey, one of Hawkeye's kids has Pietro as a middle name, okay? And that's
and that's just in like on his top. They don't even say it. I was like, you could have at least told people that.
Yeah, because like, this is how we reveal baby names. We just put them on a T-shirt. We don't tell you. We don't speak the name ourselves. We just show you this is the name.
But I really liked that. And again, we were talking previously about people being like, oh, she's lost the accent. No, like, no, she said Pietro. She said, like, in the sort of, like...
And then she sang in Sokovian.
Yeah, exactly. So... She had, like, a sort of, like, I don't know, Sokovian lullaby or something. That was great, because, again, I felt, I was like, yes, this is Wanda. Yeah. This is Scarlet Witch.
Like I said, when you pay attention in the MCU and this show, when she's, like, angry or particularly stressed out, you do hear a pinch of the Sokovian accent.
Yeah.
I'm adamant on this. Like I said it last week, when she shows up to Thanos and is like, you take everything from me.
Yeah.
Her accent was Sokovian then. You cannot tell me it was not. It's like Jake said to us, like when he gets angry, he goes full Gibraltar again.
Yeah.
He can't control it. So it's the similar thing here.
Yeah, and she's talking about her brother. So again, it makes sense that she's going to say his name as it's like officially pronounced, because a lot of people will do that. They'll just be like, maybe your name, for example. Somebody might just be like, oh yeah, Thomas, but then somebody who's Welsh might be like, oh no, it's Thomas, or like people will, so
precisely.
So her being from that background, she's going to say it the official way, and yeah, that was a great scene. Obviously, I loved the acknowledgement of that character, and it was just such a great natural way to bring it in. I loved the way that she performed that. I loved that, like, I'm a twin, and then that tear rolling down her face.
I loved the way she delivered that line, where it was just kind of, she was like, yeah, I'm a twin.
Yeah.
I really liked that and enjoyed that.
It kind of, again, I don't want to say possessed, but it was kind of like she was like transitioning out of this moment, and she was kind of saying it as like, oh, this would be a nice thing to say, but then she kind of realizes what's happening, what she's doing. And I think,
especially when Geraldine's just like, your brother was the one killed by Ultron, right?
Yeah.
And then just like that instant twist of like,
So,
what did you just say?
Yeah, so I think, possibly, if she's been sent in by Sword, she saw a moment there that she was like, oh, maybe I can get to Wanda now. I can speak to Wanda, not the sitcom version of Wanda. And then obviously when she reacted badly, she was like, oh, no, I can't. So I think that worked really well. And yeah, that, again, obviously people loved the sinister nature of that moment. I think it worked better that we didn't see what happened. But I was glad that Pietro got a shout out, especially kudos to Disney on this. It really is kind of like, this is like consumerism. This is the world we live in. But at the same time, you're like, credit to you, when the episode ends, suggested watch Avengers Age of Ultron. How many people probably are like, yeah, I'm going to rewatch that now. I want to see, what she's talking about when Ultron kills Pietro.
Same thing happened to me, and I was just like, huh, nice one.
Yeah, so
the interesting thing though is like, because if we end up seeing like both versions of Quicksilver, what I would love about that is the fact that then you'd have like the full representation of like the character's comic book history, because you've got one aspect of the Wanda Pietro mix where it's like, oh yeah, we're Magneto's children, and then you have the other one where it's like, oh no, we're actually not Magneto's children, because as is in the canon in the comic books now, they're apparently not Magneto's children. They're not even bloody mutants. I'm still mad about that, and it was purely done because Marvel were getting annoyed at Fox having the rights to most of their cool characters.
Yeah.
Seriously, if you look into some of the sabotage Marvel did to the X-Men brand purely because Fox wouldn't give the rights back.
Yeah.
It was ridiculous.
Well, that's why they were bigging up Inhumans a lot at one point, wasn't it? They were just like, yeah, we're going to do an Inhumans film.
I love that, because the thing is, I love the Inhumans, and like, I think they're like really interesting, but they're one of those aspects of the Marvel universe in the comics where they kind of work better in small doses or like in team ups. Because when they started going like, oh, we're gonna have like fucking like 6 different Inhumans titles going on at the same time, I was just like, it's a bit much. I don't need Uncanny Inhumans and all new Inhumans and just
and they're
Inhumans.
popping up everywhere in the planet because somebody has unleashed the same gas thing, and you're like, what? And it's like that's a bit.
And then it's like, ooh, look at us, we're doing a not so subtle Inhumans versus X-Men event. That is in no way a meta narrative on us trying to destroy them.
Yeah, because is the new Miss Marvel, is she an Inhuman or something like that?
She is an Inhuman, yes.
So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how these shows go as well, because like, how are they going to go the mutant route, the Inhuman route, just enhanced beings? Are they not going to put a name to it? It'll be interesting to see how that goes, especially like I said, because you got Monica Rambeau, you're going to get a Miss Marvel show later this year, so they're going to have to explain this, and it might be like you said before, the entire Infinity, the snap causing this surge of power that might be what triggers it, or something in this show. We'll see.
Do you need a break?
You read my mind.
Come with me. Escape to a world all your own, where your problems float away. When you want to get away, but you don't want to go anywhere. Hydra Soak. Find the goddess within.
Now you've brought up Hydra, that brings up some more rampant speculation about this episode, because the advert we got in this episode was another Hydra reference.
Yeah.
Also, we were talking about in our group chat how Beekeeper Man could potentially maybe be Swarm. Swarm, I think, was initially a Hydra character as well.
It's a Spider-Man villain, I think, as well, wasn't he?
Yeah, but I think he was definitely involved with Hydra, because I'm sure that's how he became Swarm.
Yeah.
So interesting. If it is Swarm, interesting to see what he's doing with Sword. And I hope they're not just rehashing it. Oh, now Hydra's actually taken over Sword, and ooh dear, you didn't see that coming, even though done this before.
I also felt that this was the most subtle product as well. I kind of did it's like Hydra Soak. I was like, yeah, that makes sense, because Hydro, I was like, yeah, that probably does sound like a genuine product, to be fair. So I did like the subtlety of that one. So I don't know, it could just be that they've Strucker, Hydra, both involved in giving Wanda her powers. So if it's still going along with what I was speculating last week, if there's something Ultron related or Sokovia, if we get more things to sort of explain her life, that might be it. But like I said, maybe it might be actually pointing to stuff that's involved outside. We'll have to see.
I would kind of like to see, just because, like, if we're talking about Wanda and Pietro's, like, real origins in the comics now, why don't they just tie the High Evolutionary into the show? I would love to see the High Evolutionary in live-action form, and it could also kind of nicely tie into the whole, like... Because I always found it hard to grasp that Hydra just managed to figure out how to utilize a Infinity Stone to give these people, like, these incredible powers. And also it's the fact that, like, I think they point out that they weren't the first test subjects. They were just the only ones that survived and were successful. I think you could then just tie the High Evolutionary into that if maybe, like, he somehow got involved with Hydra and gave them the sort of know-how in how to make it work properly. Or even that he came across Wanda and Pietro when they were younger and he experimented on them, giving them, like, some weird sort of gene that allowed them to be manipulated by the Infinity Stones to have these powers. I think the MCU is now, like, big enough and bold enough that it's making these kind of decisions. Like with WandaVision, you wouldn't have seen them making a show like this, like, even 5 years ago. But now that they can afford to do these risks, I also think they can afford to just get real deep into the comics and pull out some, like, really cool concepts and, like, maybe stop looking more towards the let's pick out the most popular aspects of the comics to, like, get people to like it, and now they can go, all right, well, let's take some of these cool aspects of the comics,
and we can have more more niche characters. So big, like, niche characters that they can't have before can now play parts in these series. And I think that ties in then to my final bit of speculation as we wrap up our conversation. Is we talked previously and touched on the citizens of the village. So I think there's been, like, a lot of speculation about that, and, like, with Herb, like you said. And one thing that I actually thought as we were discussing this, and I was like, oh, because we were, like, mentioning reality, and we said about obviously that's part of Wanda's powers and Wiccan's powers and everything. And we all know that Marvel loves to link everything to the Infinity Stones. We saw Captain Marvel, that brought back the Tesseract. We've seen the Mind Stone is in some of these trailers. And again, we don't know whether that's just because she's seeing it, because it sort of developed her powers and was a part of Vision. But a part of me feels that could we actually see the Reality Stone return? Because that's all about changing things to suit what you want it to be. So when you were talking about the villagers, being manipulated or being changed, that just brought me back to that scene of Thanos where he made Nowhere look like, he had the Collector, up against that thing. And then I was just thinking about when things dissolved and the Collector was like saying goodbye and all of that changed and it was all on fire and burning. I was like, could we get a moment like that in the show? Could it be that Wanda's gonna come across Pietro or come across or maybe just the twins themselves? Maybe all of this is just going to fade away because somebody's using the Reality Stone, or the Reality Stone has maybe even possessed Wanda, because it is a fluid kind of thing and it kind of does match with her power set. It's a kind of weird red floaty thing. So, and I could imagine that even though the stones are meant to be destroyed, that's probably the stone that seems the most likely to be able to bring itself back, because it's like a liquid. It's kind of like so. But
like that moment never sat well with me when Thanos was just like, oh yeah, I used the stones to destroy the stones, because I mean, that, like, I could go on all day about how massively they nerfed the Infinity Gauntlet for the MCU. It makes sense. They had to nerf it because otherwise, the eternal plot hole would just be like, why didn't Thanos just snap everyone out of existence? Why didn't he just do this? Because, funnily enough, Mephisto was involved in Thanos' downfall initially with the Gauntlet, because Thanos is kicking everyone's ass up until the point when Mephisto, like, says to him, like, look, your Lady Death isn't impressed. So why don't you stop the omnipotence so you can't predict everyone's attacks and then fight them like that? If, like, obviously, if they do bring the stones back, it can't be in the same way as before, as, like, we're building up to finding all the stones and then someone gets the gauntlet and that's the big Avengers film to finish off this series. But I think, as well, the stones are still important to have in universe. They're an iconic item within the Marvel universe, and also just the fact that if they're if the whole idea behind the creation is that they're just basically singularities of different sort of sources of energy within the universe, like power, time, space. If they're all representations of that, how can they truly be destroyed?
So yeah, I'm starting to think that a bit more now. I think that would be kind of cool if if that popped up. And I've seen some people, you mentioned about Lady Death and everything. I've seen some people who said that Herb had the chainsaw thing, and they said that potentially he's the Grim Reaper, because it's like the Grim Reaper had like a hook hand on his. I think he was holding it in his right hand, and the Grim Reaper's got a hook hand on his right hand.
Well, if you recall, I mentioned in our last episode that like you can briefly see a helmet in a scene that belongs to the comic character, the Grim Reaper, who, as I said, was an enemy of Vision. So, I mean, I've not personally seen that theory floating around, but I kind of like that, because I would kind of like them to bring in someone like the Grim Reaper, because as I said, I'd like Marvel to bring in some more like obscure, like deep cut characters from the comics and just get bold with it. So I kind of like that. I think that could be quite cool.
Yeah, that I'm starting to think that there could be, like, because people were saying about Dottie, so it could be that like Dottie is somebody we've had a weird encounter with her, Agnes is somebody we've had a weird encounter with her, Herb is somebody, and then like I said, maybe the other people like you said are just robots or real people, or a part of the reality stone. They could just be figments of like they're not real at all. So yeah, it'll be interesting going forward seeing how that turns out, but the only way we'll find out is by continuing to watch these episodes and breaking them down and speculating each week, which is sort to be fun. So to wrap it up here, Tom, how are you feeling towards next week's episode?
I am excited. I can't wait to see what's going to happen. I think there's going to be even more plot. Love me some plot. I'm guessing we're moving to the 80s now. Yeah, so it'd be interesting to see Vision on copious amounts of cocaine. And I can't wait to just digest whatever happens next week and just pick it apart and analyze it. Because as I've been saying this episode, I think episode 4 is going to be quite a pivotal one. I think at least one big thing is going to happen that's going to have everyone just like, oh shit. Potentially.
So yeah, I look forward to next week, seeing what fun we have with the twins, and the 80s is always a fun era to go back to. And,
yes.
Yeah. So Tom, where else can we catch yourself apart from on this podcast?
Well, you can catch me on Twitter at GapperBoy. That's boy with an I at the end. You could join me there for hard-hitting commentaries on the state of comic books, and actually, to be honest, just mostly tweets about me saying that I don't use Twitter that much. Other than that, you can just occasionally find me on this podcast, and I will be getting some more social media stuff going in the near future. But for now, just Twitter's always a good bet.
Exactly.
Either Twitter or here, basically.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You can also catch me at Twitter at David Osgar. That's OSGAR, and you can catch me on those same ats for Letterboxd and Instagram, etc. as well, if you want to catch me on those. And you can catch this podcast, Capes, Cowls, and Masks, on Twitter, which is at Capes, Cowls, Mask, and we are on Facebook at Capes, Cowls, and Masks. So subscribe to us and follow us on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. If you're feeling generous, give us a review, please. It does all really help in getting the podcast higher up on those charts. Give us a like or share and follow, and spread the word of Capes, Cowls, and Masks to all your friends, to anybody who's also speculating about this and loving all of that theories and comic book knowledge that is coming via our resident expert here, Tom. And
yes,
as well
the
with
samurai of comics.
Yes. So like I said, you can catch us all at Twitter. You can catch my co-host Jake Hart. He's on Twitter at Sweaty Jake, and also on Letterboxd. And like I said, you can catch me on Twitter as well, and Tom, and catch our page for Capes, Cowls, and Masks. So thank you for joining us. You can also catch on freshtakehub.com. There'll be a written review of this episode. If you want to check that out, that will be from Jake as well. So he'll be writing a review of episode 3. So you can catch that on freshtakehub.com. Please tell us what you think of that. Please share it. And tune in next week where we'll be back talking about the 4th episode and what we enjoyed about that. So catch you next week, guys. Bye-bye.
WandaVision.